Do you think there's an observable trend towards an increased amount of co-development as a way to mitigate costs and risk? What issues do you see this posing for coherent design and production if there is an increasing reliance on external development partners? Two questions again. Okay, do you think there's an observable trend towards an increased amount of co-development as a way to mitigate costs and risk? Yes, absolutely. And why? Actually, let me just undo what I just did. You see these lines? So if, let me get back in here. Okay, so if I hire Western developers, this is what my line looks like. If I hire people from less expensive parts of the world, this is what my line looks like when it comes to how expensive it is to make that game over time. The higher the percentage of my people that I pay in less expensive parts of the world if everything else was equal, which it is not, and we'll get to that, then I prefer line 2 over line 1. And so co-development is popular right now, and especially in parts of the world where it's less expensive to live and you don't have to pay people as much. And for a lot of these companies that are based in the United States or other very expensive parts of the world, going to somewhere like Eastern Europe or South America and paying a significantly lower wage for an engineer or an artist or whatever, this is like, yay, we're winning, like check mark, green, we love it, it's cheaper, right? Now, I think that's one reason it's happening. I think another one is it allows you to keep the local team size small, and I actually like that quite a bit. So I am a fan sometimes of keeping your core team very small, and whenever you need something that core team can't provide, you go to an external developer or an outsourcer or a contract. There are also legal things that are easier to do with contractors than they are to do with full-time employees. You feel less of a need to vet them. It's especially in some parts of the world, it's much easier if it's not working out to part ways with that company, and it's more understood that that's something that's going to happen. It's not so dramatic or dangerous in general. I mean, there's certainly contractors that have been absolutely caught unawares and really had a bad time after being cut from a contract. But if you're a contractor, you need to be thinking, I don't know if I'm going to get another contract, and I don't even know if I'm going to get to the end of this one. Where if you're a full-time employee and you get cut, it's much harder on you. It's a much bigger shift. So I think there's a bunch of reasons that aren't just it's cheaper, because sometimes people co-dev with very expensive individuals who have a lot of specialized expertise. And that's where if you're a small core team and you don't have the capability, you might pay a lot of money for someone who does have that capability to come in, do one particular thing really, really well. And now you don't need that anymore. And your staff can sustain whatever it is they did. And you can say, thank you, here's a pile of cash, but I don't have to pay you throughout the development life cycle of the game. So I think it's a lot of it. It comes down to money, but a lot of it comes down also to I can keep my core team small, and that gives me a little bit more. It allows me to be more nimble. Downsides to it, and you kind of mentioned this in the second question. What issues do you see this posing for coherent design and production if there is an increasing reliance on external development partners? I'll say something that's unpopular, but I think I've probably said it before. Some of the same things that happen when you do remote work. If you co-dev with somebody that's not co-located with you, now you have to deal with the fact that you're in two different places. That makes everything harder. Remote is something that experiences this when you're all in part of the core company. You're all full-time employees, but fully remote. It can be harder to maintain alignment, to have the right conversations. Everything can feel formal, and there is something lost when it comes to rapid collaboration by default. You think you can overcome that by being really deliberate about it, but it's sometimes we aren't trained to be deliberate about it, maybe is how I'd say it. So when you're co-deving, that is even more extreme, because you're not just trying to make sure you're staying aligned with people where you have to be very deliberate about something that perhaps you used to not have to think about as much. You are also dealing with contrasting cultures, leadership, et cetera, et cetera. You have, to some extent, different incentives when you're trying to make a game and they're trying to be a successful co-dev studio. There's a difference there, and that different incentive can play out in the way that the games are developed, and it'll come in subtle ways or in big ways or whatever it is. So you want to keep an eye on that. You want to make sure that you are, as best you can, including those co-developers in your development, integrating them onto teams, making sure that you're being pretty transparent with them. But that's higher risk. And with differences in culture, it can also not be understood well and be misinterpreted or misused. When you go into different cultures, that same thing can happen. So a lot of times, this is something I think is true for some extent, also for remote work, but you didn't want this line of expenses, like this was the one line, when I hire everybody in the United States where it's really expensive, and this is my 2 line of costs over time when I hire co-dev. The problem is that if I may, what I'm hoping is that, well, if I'm paying this much, hopefully I'm getting this much output out of both, and see, now this delta's all win, right? Well, kind of, but actually what I think happens is you don't get that line. You maybe optimistically get a line something like this. And so this is still win, but it's not as big as you thought, and everything takes longer than you thought because you have to step twice as hard to maintain alignment and manage the difference in culture. And I mean that both in terms of business culture and potentially in terms of regional or geographical culture, like different cultures between countries and things like that. So yeah, I think that covers some of what I see. Another big issue is always that if somebody external comes in and integrates with your team, there's a security risk there. There's also, they now are the experts on something that's inside of your game, and when they depart, or if they depart, if they get a better contract and they take it, you might be in trouble as well, because again, you can get rid of them much more easily than you could get rid of a team of full-time employees. That's much less controversial, but they can also drop you if they get a better deal. And so I think that you're taking on a less trustful relationship generally, and you have to manage that. You have to manage that carefully.